Hello again, viewers, and greetings, fellow space travelers. This is Thorn of Night, and welcome to part 4 of my how-to guide for RotaryCraft. Starting with this episode, and for the next few episodes, I'm going to be covering what is involved with generating power using this mod. To start things off this episode, I'm going to be covering some of the stuff you're going to encounter early on, how you're likely to get started with using this mod in general, and some of the workings involved with getting that going. And then the second part, the part after this episode, I'm going to be covering the higher end energy production, like gas engines and jet fuel and things like that, and I'm going to finish that off with some information about solar power, which in most mods it's cool, but it's kind of boring. This one, not so boring. This mod does something really interesting with the solar power. But anyway, the final part of my power production mini section of this guide is going to involve working with the power generation to produce power for other mods, and power generation that you can do using other mods to create power for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here with the DC engine. Alright, the DC engine is pretty much the first thing you're going to encounter, and it is crafted like this. I was going to show you something else first, but I'll just go ahead and show you the recipe. It takes just some of the HSLA steel ingots from this mod, shaft unit, base panels, and some redstone. And the way you generate power with it, it only has one setting, well, two settings, on or off. You just feed it a redstone signal and it produces electricity, or rather shaft power. It doesn't consume anything. There's no fuel or anything like that. You don't have to worry about it blowing up, but it is locked in at that one power generation, and the amount that it puts out, 4 newton meters of torque, 256 radians a second, and 1024 watts, or 1 kilowatt. But it is really simple and straightforward, and this is pretty much how you're going to get going with this mod. Let me go ahead and turn it on. Has a nice little buzz, and you can see it just stays steady at that power level. As soon as you remove redstone current from it, it slowly winds down because it's got to get rid of its energy, I guess. And then when it finally reaches 0, it's done. And the sound goes away. So that's how you're probably going to be getting started with this mod. Next up, I've got a wind turbine, and just like that one, it doesn't have a GUI. That's why I forgot to mention. It's just a block, and the recipe for it, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The recipe for it uses the propeller blades that I went over in a previous part to this guide, and this thing called a hub. And the hub is crafted using an HSLA steel gear, a shaft core, and this thing called a shaft bearing, which I have not gone over yet, so I'll bring up the recipe for that. Shaft bearing is one more steel ingot surrounded by ball bearings, and then finally the recipe for ball bearings is just 2 lumps of steel next to each other, and that'll get you 8. And it's hard to see in that little part there, which is why I have it highlighted here. It's this one. It's just a bunch of little ball bearings, little blips. But the way this thing works is it uses wind, big shocker, I know, to generate power. And in order to do this, it has to have clear line of sight for a distance of 16 blocks in front of it to get the optimum amount of wind for that height. Now, different heights produce different things. Let me go ahead and break this. You'll see that as soon as I broke it, it fired up to 256 watts. Well, that's not really all that much. One other thing to keep in mind about this before I continue, if you obstruct the blades like this, it'll completely stop working no matter what speed it's starting to go. It does have that nice little hum though, but this is at a very low ground level altitude, and there's some stuff in the way over there. So let me put this back and move up a little. That was 256. So let's land on the platform, make it morning. Here we're a little bit higher. My feet are at a level of 10. My eyes are at 11. And now you can see I'm getting almost 2 kilowatts of power. And there's nothing in the way of it, nothing obstructing it. Whee! I fell off. Except now that I've got that in the way. So the next one I want to show you up here, I'm at an altitude of 32, and I break this, and we zip all the way up to 4,096 watts. It's still 4 Newton meters, but it's 1 kiloradian per second. And that's pretty good power production just for raising it up a bit. But we're not done yet. Still 2 more altitudes to cover. I wanted to get one more before the peak. We are at a level of 64 off for the altitude, and I keep falling off here. There we go. And when I break that, once again, 4,096. And up here, there's nothing in the way. Those aren't directly in the way, so there's nothing obstructing it. But let's go ahead and go all the way up to 128 just to see what that does. Land on the platform. Don't fall off this time. Break that. 4,096 kilowatts. Imagine that. Now, the reason why I have this up here is pretty much no matter where you go on the map, you're not going to encounter anything obstructing you at this height. But you don't necessarily need to come all the way up to 128 to build this thing. And if you do, transporting the power is going to be at best tedious. So I just want you to see what the maximum wind production of these turbines is. If you can get to this, you don't need to go any higher. You don't need to go any farther out over the ocean to be unobstructed by your terrain or anything like that. All you need to do is target 4,096 watts. So let me go ahead and turn this guy back off. And that is the windmill. I actually tensed up there. I knew I wasn't going to take damage, and I still tensed up. Anyway, moving on to the next one. We have here something called the steam engine. And the recipe for it is, you have to do it in the work table. There are 2 recipes: cobblestone shaft unit base panels. Those are pretty straightforward. And you can either use a gold ingot or a copper ingot. I don't know why the dichotomy of rarity there, but whatever. This just means that you can make it earlier on than getting down to the gold level. And there's also this one other thing called a condenser, which is just some liquid pipe I went over in a previous episode, as well as some HSLA steel. I'll just go ahead and show you the recipe for the liquid pipe. This has to be done in the work table. I don't think I had anything special in here. Yeah, the condenser, so I could show you the recipe. Oh well. Now, the way this works is, well, let me bring open the book. I have the book. Why not bring it up? It needs water. It has to be piped in order to work, and it can only be piped in from one side. This side here, where that little black square is on the back. You can't pipe it in through the bottom or the sides. And this side here is power output, so it's just the one side. But There is a risk involved with this. And it says 150 degrees. I call shenanigans on that. I had it happen at 125. It will overheat and explode and likely turn to lava. It's a mess, and you have to watch the temperature. So the maximum power that you can get out of it is 16,384 watts. So this one, if you can see at the top of my screen, I have at 120 degrees Celsius. And that's just a block of fire on a block of netherrack. If you put lava underneath this, it will explode and fail. So let's get some water going in here just to see how this works and see if 120 degrees is enough to get it to that 16,000. Here we go. First off, 16,384, exactly what we wanted. And this is the maximum output you're going to get from this guy. Heating it up won't put any more out. And also you will notice that there's a little chug sound like a little steam engine, which it is. Hear that? Wonderful. So let me go ahead and, well, I guess doing that won't do anything. It does burn through the water at a somewhat slowish pace, so you don't have to be feeding it tons of water, but it will burn through. And this chug noise is going to bother me, so I'm going to replace that. There we go. But that is the steam engine. I don't think I had anything else to cover in that. Anyway, moving on to the next one. This guy is called the AC electric engine. And, well, first let me open up the book here. Here we go. The first thing you need to know about this is going to require some other machines in order to get this working. Also, you are going to probably not get into this early on. This is going to take a good amount of time to get one of these running. But real quick, there are no risks. It's not going to blow up or catch anything on fire. There's nothing to consume, no jet fuel or anything like that. There is something that you had to put in called a shaft core, and it will wind down, and you'll have to recharge it. It's magnetized shaft core. Also, in order to get it to work, you need a redstone clock of some sort. The maximum power that you're going to get out of it is 131,000 watts or 131 kilowatts. So this is where we're starting to get into some good power here. But real quick, part of the recipe, I believe I showed you long enough, but just in case, turn off the rain. It requires gold ingots or electrum ingots in this case. I don't know why the electrum ingots are an option, but whatever. A gold coil, I'll show you in just a second. A shaft unit, some base panels, and redstone. But the gold coil here is just gold ingots or electrum ingots surrounding HSLA steel. Now, moving on. There are a few ways you can go about giving it a sort of timer. There are redstone clocks and timers that are added by other mods, but there's also a way to make a clock that will operate this pretty effectively. How are you? I didn't put you to stop making chug noises. There. No water. No water for you. Anyway, using just some very simple materials that are in vanilla, you can get pretty much maximum power out of this. But in order to get that maximum power, you are going to need this thing called a shaft core. It's HSLA steel and 2 shaft units, and that will get you just a regular shaft core here. So let's go ahead and put this in. And also, it does need a timer, so let's add a timer to it. like so. That's just a redstone clock sends a little pulse, and nothing is happening. There's a reason for that. You need to charge up your shaft core using a separate machine. It is called a magnetizing unit, and let me just go ahead and show you what this can do here. There we go. A nice little hum to go with it. Its maximum output, you can see it jumping up to 131,072 watts. And it flaggers because this is kind of a slow pulse. So let's get rid of that. And without a pulse, it will stop functioning altogether, just so you know. Let's put on a Project Red timer. I believe I have to face it this way. Yes. And let's reduce this down to its absolute fastest tick. And there you go. It's staying stable at its maximum output. But that tick is kind of annoying. So, I would like to demonstrate something that I came up with about, I don't know, 2 years ago when I was trying to come up with a burnout timer for a project I was working on. Nothing too terribly fancy, but I thought it was kind of interesting little idea that I had, so I decided to see if it would work on this, and lo and behold, it does. This is just vanilla blocks. You make a V out of some sort of solid block here. You put a redstone repeater and put it to the second notch, not the start off one. You put some redstone there, so it will... Okay, hold on. I put this over one too far. Let's not do that. Let's not power the wrong thing. Wouldn't do anything, but... Second notch, anyway. Redstone there to this guy. And then let's go ahead and put a lever there. It just got a little tiny pulse from that redstone. It'll be done in just a second. And put a redstone torch on the side of this. Now, for those of you who are familiar with things like burnout timers, if this was on its full speed, or if this was some other similar form of a burnout timer, after a certain amount of time, this would just flicker on and off way too fast, and it would just burn out, which is why it's called a burnout timer. But if you put it on the second notch, it will flicker at that speed there, and look at that. That is more effective than the redstone clock. So there's a number of ways you can get an on-off power signature from this, but it does require this shaft core. Now let me show you this for a few moments. Look how fast it's going through the power on that shaft core. Alright, now let's take this out and go ahead and get rid of this. Don't need it here right now. And put it in the magnetizing unit, which I'll show you how to make this in just a moment. Actually, let me go ahead and put this stuff back. And I'll show you now, why not? Now that I've got the inventory spot. It requires 2 of those gold coils again, a mount, which I've gone over before, base panels on all 4 corners, and a redstone. It has to be done in the work table. So anyway, when you put the shaft core in, immediately you don't see it until you turn this thing on. First off, it requires power, and the amount of power that it needs, here let me go ahead and bring up the page for it, is that 16,384 watts. So that's 2,048 radians a second at 8 Newton meters is the bare minimum. But it doesn't have to be anything in the Newton meters in the torque, just 1 to get this thing going. I wanted you to see how fast it regenerates the Teslas, which is an increment of energy here, when using the same power that's being put out by that machine at its maximum. So first turn this on. Nothing's happening because this also needs a clock to run. But look at that. It's about 5 or 6 times slower than it burns through over there. So you are definitely going to need to get one of these going at pretty high power before you can actually get started on using that. But once you can get one of those, or a slew of them, this is going to probably be your meat and potatoes for a while. Let's make it morning again real quick and move on to the next thing. This guy is called the Hydrokinetic Engine. It does not have a GUI, but where's my book? It is in the book, of course. Here we go. The recipe for it is a shaft core and 4 paddle panels. And did I forget? Yes, I totally forgot. So let's go ahead and do this. Paddle. Recipe for the paddle panel is just 9 of these base panels, but it'll only get you 1. So it's a little costly to make this, but it's totally worth it. You'll probably use this more than you'll be using that anyway. First off, it does not have any explosive risk, but if you run into those paddles, you will take some damage, and any entities, mobs or whatever that bump into them, they'll take damage too. Now the source of power for this is falling water. The maximum, absolute maximum you can get out of one of these is 524 kilowatts. That's some power. Now it does require this stuff called lubricant, and I will go over how to make that in just a bit, but here I have some lubricant feeding into the side. It feeds into the side that you are basically, here's the way you put this thing down in the world. You have to put it on the side of a block, but there has to be room. Fill that in, which is why I have a trough there. But when you place it, this side is the output, and the side facing away from you is where you pump in the lubricant. So this takes water to run. So let's go ahead and get some water. First, I'll put it at a height of 10, so you can see the power output. It immediately starts as soon as the water hits it, and this paddle wheel starts spinning around, and you get a kilowatt. Okay, not too bad. Let's shut that off and come up to a height of 32. That'll take a second for the water to get down. And there we go, 67 kilowatts. And that's just falling water. You just climb up into the sky and pour a bucket, and there you go, 67 kilowatts. You do need lubricant, but that's not too bad. I'll show you here in a bit. But let's go to the maximum height that you can generate power with this from, 64 blocks. And it's coming, don't worry. Almost here. There we go. 524,288 kilowatts. I believe that's the same that it says from the maximum in here. Yes. 524 kilowatts of power. That is some serious power there, and it's a very high torque. And it's actually not too bad on the speed either. But let's say you want to generate more power than just this. You can put them in sequence. You can stack them as long as you want within reason. I mean, they all have to be chunk loaded or whatever, and recognize that they're all attached in line. But you only have to feed the lubricant into one end, and it will lubricate all of them. You can see up above I have that little tip, almost 24,000 in both. So let's go ahead and come up here and plop some water at the 64. So that was this one here was just over half of a gigawatt. That's, or I'm sorry, a megawatt. I'm sorry. This is just over 1 megawatt. So it will stack, and you can continue going farther and farther with it. It is a wonderful source of power, and all it takes is a little bit of water. So I'm going to turn that off so it's not running while I'm finishing this off. The lubricant. In order to make the lubricant, you are going to need this thing called a grinder. Now the grinder does have a GUI, and the page for it here says that it needs some steel, or a steel gear, some base panels, and 2 saws. And the recipe for the saw is another steel gear with some steel ingots around it. This will come down eventually. But you can see the GUI here. First off, there is power, speed, and torque over here to let you know, and once it's got a sufficient amount to run minimally. And actually I will go ahead and show you the minimal requirements for this. It has to have 4096 watts of power. It has to have 128 newton meters of power. So that's 32 radians per second. And it won't explode. I've had it absolutely maxed out, and you don't have to worry about it going boom or anything like that. But this thing is used to grind stuff. Cobblestone, or smooth stone to cobble, cobble to gravel, gravel to sand. Several other things can be ground, including canola seeds, which you can find out in the world by breaking grass, or maybe you've got a crop of it going already from doing that. It grows just like wheat. I went over this, I believe, in the first part of this guide. But let's go ahead and show you what it looks like to grind a single piece of stone at the minimum. Pretty slow here. Now, if you want it to go faster, you have to just increase the radians per second. The absolute maximum speed this can go is 32,768 radians per second. So let's go ahead and put that in. And you can see that it's 1 item per tick. I'll go ahead and put a whole stack in there, and you can see how fast it's going now. Whole stack of cobblestone. There we go. Whole stack of gravel. Whole stack of sand. And that's where it stops on the sand. Now, one other interesting thing is that output is an inventory slot, so you can work with these pneumatic item. Oh, what are they called? I forgot already. Pneumatic item pump. There we go. So power them with power, make sure they're in sequence, and the items will end up where they're supposed to at the end of the line. So that does count as an inventory for when you're grinding things. Now, you can also grind netherrack into netherrack dust. This is important later on. Soul sand gets ground into tar, and just about anything that's made out of wood that you can think of can get ground into different varying amounts of sawdust. Like, for instance, planks will get you 4 sawdust. A stone, or a wooden axe will get you just a couple sawdust. A stick will get you 1 sawdust. But you can make sawdust, and using the sawdust, you can make either planks of different colors. So you can actually make the color planks using dyes. Or with some stone in a bucket, you can also make some paper there. So that's kind of nice. There's another recipe for it. Shapeless crafting, you can use quicklime to make paper. But that is something else entirely. Now, one other thing. The canola seeds. With this, if I put the canola seeds in, they still go into that same spot, but it comes over here as lubricant. You can either take the lubricant out as bucket form. Is this just a plain bucket? Yes. Like that, and it'll fill up the bucket, and you'll have one bucket of lubricant there. Or, if I break this, you can just take lubricant pipe, or lubricant hose. Yeah, lubricant hose, and connect it directly to the output spot of this, and it will pump lubricant out. So that is the grinder. It is absolutely wonderful thing for getting some additional resources. Making sand is a blast with this, especially if you aren't near a desert and have exhausted your beaches and everything. This is a pretty cheap way to make some sand. But that is how you get your lubricant, and it can be interacted with, obviously, the RotaryCraft lubricant hose, and also liquid piping and liquid ducts from other mods. There's a lot of mod interactivity going on. This is just one of the most well-assembled mods I've ever encountered. But that is going to be it for this part 4 of my how-to guide for RotaryCraft. So, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to leave a message in the comments section below. I will do my best to get back to you as quick as I can. If you like this video and you like what I'm doing here, please feel free to give a like. I do appreciate that. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you know when my future stuff comes out. But I'm going to wrap up here, so thank you once again for watching. This is Thorn of Night, and I will talk to you later.